All right, I'm ready. Are you ready? Of course you are, or you wouldn't have hit play. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. How's it going? Are you new? If so, welcome. Everyone else, what's the word, y'all? Can you believe the way time is happening? I mean, it's getting weirder and weirder. Like a blink of an eye this week happened. And there's a number of very unusual things happening here today. The first of which is it's Sunday. Like, this is supposed to go out in less than 12 hours. And I don't think I've ever recorded this late. Maybe once or twice. Even those times when you've heard me go, I'm up against it this week, y'all. It's usually late night Saturday. Because normally I try to record the intros and outros on Friday. And if I can't get it done on Friday, I do it on Saturday. But, I mean, this is maybe the second time ever in the history of the show that I've done this on a Sunday. And the reason is that Friday and Saturday just slipped right past me, largely because yesterday was my wife's birthday. I had husband and father duties. We made a cake. I made dinner. That took up most of the bandwidth of that day. And I thought I would do it late last night, but I was just toast. So it didn't happen, and now here we are, making it happen, y'all, making it happen. Fortunately, I don't think it's that important for me to do a very extensive intro or outro today, because as you will hear, today's episode is a little bit different than usual. In fact, this is a first. You see, this episode was recorded for someone else's podcast, and I am now releasing it to you here on the Yoga Talks feed. And this is a common thing that podcasters will sometimes do. If you go on someone else's show, you release that episode on your show as a way to kind of mix it up for your audience to sort of hear the usual host on the other side of the desk, so to speak. And I have been on many other podcasts before, but this is the first time I'm ever choosing to release someone else's episode here. And the reason is that there was something different about this one. You see, the host, Todd Mclaughlin, from the Native Yoga Toddcast, he's someone who listens to this show, and he did something that I recognize as a fellow podcaster is very difficult. If you listen to enough podcasts, you will observe that there is often a little bit of a formula. And I use it sometimes too, where, you know, you get somebody's yoga story, like when was your first yoga class, and you sort of trace their journey to the present. And, you know, there's a reason for that. There is a way of setting context for any other conversations you might have. But sometimes they don't go much beyond that, you know, and so teachers have their spiel. They know their yoga story because they've had to tell it before. And when I'm getting ready to talk to somebody, if I Google them and I see that they've been on other podcasts and I go and listen to them and those podcasts have already done that, I will want to not do that. I mean, sometimes there's a bit of information is important, but very often I will make a conscious choice that I'm not going to do any of that. And it's infinitely more challenging because it means having to really try to connect to someone, which, you know, it sometimes feels very easy and sometimes doesn't feel very easy for lots of different reasons on both sides of the call. But Todd, he did not ask me for my yoga bio story. What he did is he went to the most pressing matters that are troubling him personally, or the things that matter most to him right now. And that was very cool because I try to do that too. And when you do that, you kind of put yourself out on a limb and you hope that the person's going to come out there with you. And so in any case, I really appreciated this conversation with Todd. It was about relevant current matters. It was recorded just a couple weeks ago. And I just thought it would be cool for you all to hear it as well. So Todd agreed, and you're going to hear it today. Now, if this is your first time here, you are showing up on a very unusual day. I want to mention that next week, Gil Headley will be here, and we'll be returning more to our usual fare. Although we won't be returning to the formulaic bio story that I was talking about because I chose not to do that with Gil. If you know who he is, he's a pretty amazing guy. He made that infamous The Fuzz video. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go to YouTube and search Gil Headley, The Fuzz. In any case, he's a really amazing guy, and we had a fantastic conversation, and you're going to get to hear that one next week. But today, you will be hearing more from me than usual even, as I appeared on Todd Mclaughlin's Native Yoga Toddcast. Real quick before we get to that, let me give a shout out to Terry Sellers and Sophie Chrisman. Terry and Sophie are both podcast premium subscribers, and it's because of people like Terry and Sophie and all of the rest of our subscribers that we've been able to really keep this going the way we have. If you listen to the show on a regular and you want to have access to the full archives, or maybe you just want to help support, becoming a podcast premium subscriber is the way to do that. And we realize that we are in extraordinary and difficult times. It is a choose your rate, and you can cancel at any time. If you are really in a bad way and you can't afford to give anything at all, just email us and we will give you a free account. But if you are in a position to contribute, it makes a huge difference, and we are incredibly grateful. You can find out more about becoming a podcast premium subscriber, along with all of my other stuff, online classes, the teacher's call, yoga business course, which we talk about today, you'll hear. Everything can be found at jbrownyoga.com. All right, y'all. We're going to let that be it. I will touch base with you for a brief moment on the other side, but let's do it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Todd Mclaughlin on the Native Yoga Toddcast. Hello.
Hello, Jay. This is Todd.
Hey, Todd.
How you doing, man?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing good. I just want to give you the courtesy of letting you know I have decided to just go ahead and hit the record button so we could just let people hear the beginning part of this whole conversation.
Well, you've listened to my show, so you know I'm game. I respect that you did that, and I appreciate why you would do that, and I'm happy for us to be already in it.
That's cool, man. You know, I just listened. There's a few things I'd like to let the listeners know is that, number one, I love your show, and so I'm a fan, and I really appreciate this opportunity. And I feel like listening to your podcast helped me at a point where I was going through a tough time reconciling some different feelings about yoga and tradition and all these great things. And so in March, when the pandemic hit, I'd had a dream of starting a podcast. And when I started listening to your show, I started having this little inkling that I really appreciate conversation, and I noticed how much listening to your show helped me, and I thought, could I do that? Could I actually do that? And when the pandemic hit, a friend of mine had some podcasting gear, and he said, Todd, you should do this. And so that barrier to entry got broken really quick for me, and here we are. And so I just want to say thank you.
You're so welcome. I can't tell you how much joy I get from hearing you say all that. I mean, doing the show has been like a healing thing for me, so that it might have had any of that kind of effect for you is a bonus. And I really know what it's like to be on your side of this call. And it's not something that it's for everybody. I think that to just be by yourself in a room and talk into a microphone and have someone else want to listen to that is a thing in itself. And then even to, do this, to dive into a conversation with someone that you don't really know at all.
Yeah.
And share it is, it's a thing. So kudos to you. I'm happy to have this be like a mutual back and forth inspiration.
That's cool, man. I appreciate that. And we had set this date to do this about maybe it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was pre the holidays, and I remember when we set the date, whenever I do one of these, I start mulling over what am I going to ask them, or whoever I'm talking with, like what is my goal here, and I've been doing that for a little while, and today is the 7th. It's January 7th, 2020. And then I had such an interesting day yesterday watching the events of what happened at the Capitol in DC, that I feel like my whole plan for what I was going to talk to you about got shifted a little bit. And and that's where I just kind of want to ask you, how are you feeling today? Like how are you processing what you observed yesterday?
Oh, gosh, I don't even know if I've processed it. I mean, we're still in the middle, you know what I mean? Like, what happened yesterday was mind-blowing. It was those surreal images coming through the TV. I mean, I will say this. I don't know how deep you want to get into politics, but I'm very deeply disgruntled and unhappy with the Democratic Party on so many levels. I think that for a long time, people have been saying, that Trump wasn't going to leave. He wasn't going to leave. And it just seems like, I don't know. Like I said, I don't even really know what to say about it other than I'm not surprised, but still utterly disheartened and disgusted.
Yeah. I agree with you. I had that overall kind of feeling of sadness when I was observing, like you said, the imagery and the reports. There was that initial, or just kind of that sadness element of like, what in the world? So yeah, I hear you. I typically have, because I've been working with this show in the last year, which has been a pretty heavy year in terms of a lot of issues. I've been trying to stay away from talking about politics as much as possible, because I feel like people are getting it so regularly all day, every day, that I've been mostly focusing on how is yoga helping? How are we getting through the pandemic as yoga practitioners, teachers, studio owners? And I've just been tiptoeing around the political side. And I guess in some respects, something that I've noticed, or what I appreciate about your work, is that you're pretty straightforward and honest, and you say what you're thinking.
I try.
And I guess that's where I'm willing today to go here a little bit more, and just know.
I'm down. I appreciate it. You are clearly someone who listens to the show. So I am so happy that you decided to go to what is most pressing and like sticky and hard to talk about, because I think that's really the most important place to be. I guess I first want to say, like, just before I said I was disheartened with like the Democratic Party, I want to also say the Republican Party is much worse. Let me qualify that by saying that too. I don't want to leave them out. But to what you're asking, I would say for some time, I've been incredibly cynical, because I was always a registered independent since college, because I never trusted either of those parties. And then when Bernie Sanders ran for president in 2016, I switched my registration so that I could vote for him in the primary in New York. And then New York pulled shenanigans. Like, I changed my registration really early on. Like, it must have been like September or early October, I think, which should have been in time for the election. And they changed the rules in New York, and they did a weird thing where they switched the goalpost, and then a bunch of people like myself got disenfranchised, and I wasn't able to vote in the primary, even after changing my registration. And then in the most recent election in 2020, they torpedoed his campaign again. I'm disappointed with him as well. But I say that because to me right now, like if I really look at the situation, and let's be specific, let's talk about the pandemic, which is sort of what inspired your podcast, it seems like almost. To me, like they voted for that original CARES Act and gave trillions of dollars away to corporations and then gave a small pittance in those $1,200 checks. And I should be fair. I got the assistance. I got a PPP loan. I got pandemic unemployment assistance as well. I mean, I got help and they helped me through. So I'm in an incredibly privileged place that a lot of other people are not, that I was able to do that. I will say as a side note, the reason why I was able to get that assistance, and this is just a little bit of a interesting tidbit, is because in order to start my yoga center back in 2007 in Brooklyn, I was able to get an SBA Community Express loan, which was this weird little thing that they were giving money to people who had really good credit but no collateral. And I got $15,000 from the SBA to start a yoga center in 2007, which I paid off over 10 years. So like right when I was closing the center, I paid off that loan. But like that, because I had that previous relationship, like already through Bank of America and the SBA, I got cleared for stuff really easily because they already knew me or something. But that's just a side note. So I've gotten that assistance. And
one thing that's important to mention that I think for those that are curious, like how is all that even working? If in case someone's not familiar, if people could have had a business for many, many years, requested for PPP assistance, and had they not had a line of credit with a bank, the bank was unable and or unwilling, I'm not sure exactly how that worked, but to be able to lend that person money. You know, like someone could have a business where they weren't needing credit at all. Like they were doing really good at business and they were working off their capital, and therefore they went to go and apply and they're like, sorry, you didn't have a credit card with us or a credit account, and they weren't able to get it through that means. So I think that's an interesting note. What you're bringing about your prior relationship did make that easier in this situation.
Well, I will also say the only reason I had that relationship was because of one specific person who started a company to help small businesses navigate the process, because they deliberately make the process kind of impossible. But I will also say it's just, and this is for yoga teachers in general, especially younger yoga teachers who are like, have eyes on this being their livelihood. And I don't know if that's something we talk about today, but having made a living off of yoga now for 20 years and have a wife and 2 kids, will say that on paper, what yoga teachers do doesn't really even register. Like I'm trying to refinance the only reason I was able to get a mortgage was a private mortgage between me and the people who own the house without a bank.
Right.
Because when I show them, like even though I can even show the income that meets the requirement, most mortgages are done with algorithms now.
Oh.
And if they can't punch you in to the algorithm, you need to be granted an exception.
Wow.
And in order to get an exception, you have to go through underwriters, and they are adverse to taking those kinds of risks.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry we went down a little bit of the weeds sidetrack, but I do think that this all plays into like my politics, which is what your question started with.
Yeah.
Which is that I tend to be pretty radical. Like I think that both of the parties are actually serving corporate interests right now. And I don't see anybody challenging the power structure. Even recently, I was in favor of the force the vote, where I wanted the squad, I wanted AOC and these other people to force Nancy Pelosi to have a Medicare for all vote on the floor or not vote for her for speaker. And they didn't play that kind of hardball because the progressives never do, and other people will. And those are the ones who end up getting their agenda served. So to me, I don't see enough. I'm looking for the politicians who are going to actually challenge the power structures that I think are making things the way they are when they don't have to be that way.
Yeah. Interesting. I hear you. I mean, and I agree. I think that because it's so only one day, this is yesterday, and anytime something big happens, it takes time to process. And I always find I want more information. And when I spoke with someone this morning, one thing that side note, I also got started as a massage therapist and yoga teacher 20 years ago. Also am married and have 2 children. And that's something that I appreciate is I feel that being a parent and making our way as parents, my wife is also a teacher, I appreciate that. I also am thankful to have this opportunity because I feel like the camaraderie of we're in the same boat. We're in a very similar.
Yeah,
we're all in the same boat here. How has this year been for you? I know it's, I listened to what you had to say about the turn of the 2021 and, the arbitrary set of numbers and how does that really affect what's going on? And I felt like this morning, I'm like, well, there goes that whole idea of 2021 as being this rosy, fantasy land of only good vibes going on. Like it's January 6th and we're already in but then another person who, and I'm bouncing these ideas off people and I'm always feeling like I'm just wanting to see where are they at. And it's amazing how many different reactions there are. And I know this is obvious because this is what we're up against every day. What was your reaction, though, to when the people got up over the top of the steps? Something about that to me. I mean, I really respect the police force, and I have full respect for fire, police, military, and people that have really put their whole lives into protecting and taking care of us, but it just seemed to me that it was so easy for people to get in, and it just kind of shocked me. I mean, I've gone to other institutions like museums or in times when I've been in DC, I feel like it's so locked down already. Like I can't even imagine breaking in. It just, how are you feeling about that?
I don't know. I mean, I jumped online for a second this morning and there was a slew of these memes, comparing like what it looked like during the BLM protests and what it looked like when they were easily able to just move past these police officers into the state capitol with guns. And to me that, it's really obvious. I don't know why we beat around the bush. Like we have a white supremacist president. It's emboldened white supremacist voices in our country, and that's why so many of us are. And for a long time, people if you would say that about the president, you weren't like they would come back at you. But I don't think at this point anybody could deny it when you see the Confederate flags flying as they roamed the halls yesterday. So I don't know. It does seem quite systemic. I've talked to plenty of people about systemic racism, and I think that's a real thing, and we should be honest about that, and we need to be honest about that.
Yeah. Do you feel like yeah. All right. Good point. Yeah.
I mean, where were you going with it?
Yeah. Good question. I guess that for me, out of the whole imagery that I observed, that to me was just the one thing that just something didn't add up. And I guess until we have more information.
Hey, listen, if you want to go there, my friend, I will say, in the past, certainly, I'm prone towards believing a certain number of conspiracy theories, frankly. When it comes to aliens, which they've actually recently, a lot of different places have sort of been putting out press during the pandemic about the existence of aliens. And I mean, I don't want to sound crazy, but I think that there certainly are. And I always say this, you hear me say it on the show a million times and people don't like it, but it still sticks in my craw because I was in New York on 9/11. And no one has ever explained to me why World Trade Center Building 7 fell down. No planes hit it. There were none of the surrounding buildings were damaged. No one ever talks about it, and it drives me crazy. So I don't really always believe official stories or what we get to see on the news.
Yeah.
And the people who were there, like, I don't know, the rioters in their whatever weird hats and makeup and like this, the people they seem kind of like idiots. I don't know, you know what I mean? They weren't very impressive. I don't know, Joe.
If they were actors.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm not saying that they're actors. I think they're whatever they are. To me, I take all of it with a big grain of salt because I don't really think that we get to see. I don't trust a lot of the news sources. And I mean, I watch stuff, but I'm always looking at all through a very discerning eye because if you read Noam Chomsky and Manufactured Consent, it does come back to what I was saying before. Like, there's a massive wealth inequality, and there's people who steer the policies and agendas in a way that protect their power and wealth at the expense of the majority of people. And finding ways to seize back some of that power and wealth for people rather than a very small few is, I think, been the plight of America for a long time. And I don't know, the scales have tilted away from the people. Let's just say that.
Yeah.
You know?
Good point. I appreciate that. And I guess we could consider this a similar subject, but on a slightly different subject, something so that the listeners can understand my initial appreciation for the work that you're doing. I practice Ashtanga Yoga. I have studied in Mysore, practiced in Mysore with Pattabhi Jois in 2004. And I, prior to that, practiced with Bikram Chowdhury and did his teacher training in Los Angeles in 2002. So I say that because I have been around yoga personalities and gurus, so to speak, that then have had this sort of like kind of shakedown of the foundation. And I was struggling when there was conversations surrounding the allegations of Pattabhi Jois. Now, when the allegations around Bikram were happening, to me that was something that was very obvious. I was very close to those people in Los Angeles and La Cienega Boulevard. And I saw firsthand, and my gut instinct always kind of told me that something is really wrong here. And my wife and I decided let's get out of here. Let's go to India and go practice Ashtanga. And so I had this like searching for a guru experience and feeling like I'd found one and was really enamored. And then when the allegations about Pattabhi Jois were coming out, I just had a whole meltdown of like, every situation I've had where I've gone and practiced with a, Indian teacher, there's been this moral dilemma attached with them. And you probed Ashtanga practitioners in a way that was just perfect for me at the time. And I feel like those conversations were so helpful because perhaps you weren't in the heat of the Ashtanga world, so you could see it from an eye outside of the inner circle, so to speak. And so that's really important work, and I think that's something I really appreciate. Where are you now personally in your appreciation of the realm of the guru and the realm of the independent practitioner figuring it out for themselves?
Well, first, before I get to your question, I'm curious, when you say that that the show played a role in terms of the Ashtanga community, are you talking about a specific one because I had a bunch of them? You had a bunch of them, and I think I listened to all of them, and I might have missed one, but that's how I actually found your show was through that
line of inquiry that you were taking. And it helped me process all of it, because I feel like there was a lot of no one was talking about, or it was taboo to talk about, and it was that investigation that you did, in my opinion, that was helpful for me to at least hear what people are saying. And the one with Rain was Karen Rain, am I correct?
Yes.
That one was like life-changing for me. And I think also too, because on that episode, you really got put on the spot.
That was a real example. Believe me, you were uncomfortable, and we that was a time where we recorded again. We did the second thing where she got to ask me questions, and that was a real learning experience for me as well in terms of doing this show and handling those kinds of conversations.
Yeah,
and I've been, I've made mistakes, I think, but what I would say to you is that the reason why I think that those conversations were useful in that way for people like you is that, I started the show wanting to reflect back on the last 10 plus years of, being in the yoga game and really noticing how much things had shifted. When I came in the 90s, as if you listen to the Krishna Das episode this week, and it goes to your question about gurus. I was asking Krishna Das about gurus this week for much the same reason I think you're asking me about gurus, which is that in the past, they were the authorities. We looked to them to tell us what yoga was, or to teach us give us the teachings. Yeah. And the generation before me, people like Krishna Das, they had real gurus. To him, it was very real, and they played a very special role. And they brought those experiences back and opened yoga centers that we went to. And I went to India and looked for a guru and didn't find one. You found one in Pattabhi Jois, but I studied a bunch of different systems of practice. I was never interested in those, the heads of those systems as a guru. They never connected to me in the way when Krishna Das talks about Nareem Kauroli Baba. They didn't interact with people like that. It was all asana and pranayama. And so ultimately I did gravitate to the teachings of Desikachar because he's one of the few Indian teachers. His son had a big fall from grace, but he's one of the few who I think holds up to scrutiny. Yeah. But in terms of where I stand with gurus, I just got an email from one of the teachers in my teacher's class today. I have it tonight. And we're going to talk about this because they heard the show with Krishna Das, and she was sort of saying there's this idea of this special people like Nareem Kauroli Baba, who was, this beyond ego place, and that to meet them and be in their presence just bestows this blessing on you, and they help you on your path. And I've never met anybody who I've had that experience with, and very few people I know have ever met anybody who has that experience. And the idea, and it's a problematic idea to me that we put up some special people like that. Because I've also met, and if you remember, I had that episode with my friend who's a farmer, and talking to him, he was he could be a guru. You know what I mean? So to me, I've always been trying to find the spirituality and the reverence of the totally mundane life I'm having, and so I'm trying, ideas of guru that make it seem oh, well, we'll never have that, or that's some special thing. I don't know. I'm not, something about that rubs me a little bit wrong. At the same time, I don't think that I would take off the table that there are other cultures and other times where people have had an opportunity to experience life and resonate that in certain ways. And when you meet them, you feel that. I acknowledge, I don't discount the possibility of a real guru. But as Krishna Das was saying, real gurus, they never take anything from you. And they never ask anything of you. You know what I mean? The way that he described it was so far from Pattabhi Jois and Mr. Iyengar, these people,
On that note, I want to encourage everyone listening to go to J Brown Yoga and check out your most recent. I mean, maybe by the time this comes out and your next one comes out, but have people look for the Krishna Das one. It was great. And one thing I love that you brought up, I mean, it made me laugh in such a good way, because you had mentioned to him about how your appreciation, or how you learned to appreciate the mantra practice. And then when you were teaching, you decided to incorporate that, and some of the students, joined in, and then it kind of turned into you and maybe two students. And, I might be changing the story a little bit, but then you found yourself being the only one, and that it was performative. And I've had a very similar experience. And the mental chatter that goes on when that's happening is tough to kind of get through. And so when you relayed that experience, I cracked up, because I was like, oh my God, same thing. And I loved how Krishna Das responded with that you're not doing it really for anybody else. And whether or not somebody else, and I hope I'm doing Krishna Das a service here and not messing up what he said, but to the effect of how I felt that, or how I took that, was that you're really just chanting for yourself, and whether or not somebody else joins in or not, it doesn't even matter. And the simplicity of bringing your attention back to the Sri Ram, Jai Ram, and keeping your mind in that process. I don't know. I loved it. It was excellent. It was great.
Well, I'm glad to hear I'm not the only one who've had that experience. I'm sure there's others maybe who are listening to this too, where, if you've been at it for long enough, in the earlier days, there was often chanting. There was always chanting.
Yeah.
And so, again, I never did call and response with people, but I always invited people to join me. And as you described, there used to always be a good number of people who chanted with me. And then as time went on, it dwindled and dwindled to where I was the only one. And then, as you said, it did start to feel like, when I'm always the only one chanting for a little while, it feels like I'm performing something for everybody.
Yeah. And that's an odd feeling, isn't it? It's a weird...
Well, it is. It's just, it changed from being like us all make Om sounds together, which is what I at some point sort of landed on, is just doing Oms, because... not that everybody was doing it, but the idea that there would be something there. Like, I wasn't ready to I couldn't let go of it completely, because in my practice, I was still chanted, And so to me, it was a part of what I did as a teacher too. And in the early days, I used to really like that. I liked that someone who had never heard a person chant Sanskrit in the same room with them, when they came to my class, they heard a person chant Sanskrit in the same room with them, and someone who was like a New Yorker like them, or whatever, like the way that Krishna Das was somebody I could relate to.
Yeah.
So, at the same time, I will also say, as I said to Krishna Das, at some point there's this conversation around cultural appropriation that happened, and I had somebody get mad when they heard me chant and leave. But I also had people from India give me hugs and thank me for it. So I had a lot of conversations around that, as you know, if you listen to the show, about whether or not it's okay for me to chant. And at a certain point, I determined that it's perfectly fine for me to chant, even though I'm a white male.
Yeah.
But I also, like you and like Krishna Das said, I've come back to doing it, because in a way it's even more vital now than in other times in my life. And like he said, it doesn't really matter to me anymore. I'm not trying to win anybody over as I once was in the past. And I think that's maybe a big change, frankly, going forward for the yoga world, is this idea of selling people on it or winning them over, to me is at issue.
That's a great point. I was listening to an interview recently where just talking about this element of within the world of, well, even what we're doing here now, but also social media and or writing and or, video, that, playing to the audience and then giving the people what they want once we start to get praise, because that's what the whole model is set up on. But then how authentic and or where's the integrity in that? And that's a really interesting question. I was wondering if you could bring up, I appreciate what you have to say about this idea of letting go of social media as yoga teachers, because that's been a whole interesting avenue in these last 10 years, is how to navigate as a yoga person, a yoga practitioner, teacher, studio owner. Like, there's this feeling like I have to do this or else I will not succeed. And I feel like there's a little bit of a movement going on for multiple reasons that we could talk about if we choose or not, but around the line of, no, you don't necessarily.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.